Mike 0 X-ray November Charlie from Papa Japan 7 stroke Golf Mike 5 Radio Delta X-ray.
The idea for my Caribbean Islands DXpedition began following an amateur radio trip I made to a Scottish island for the 2023 Islands on the Air contest. Being able to concentrate on operating my radio on an island location was excellent. I really enjoyed the experience and wanted to do something similar again. I followed this up with several trips to other Scottish West Coast islands for more radio operations. I've made quite a number of long-distance solo adventures to remote parts of the world in the past with my photographic and scuba diving interests. Now, I wanted to operate ham radio somewhere more exciting too. My radio license at the time did not allow for overseas operations, so I got my head down and studied. I sat and passed the UK's full radio amateurs exam in the autumn of 2023. I was issued a new call sign, GM5RDX. This permitted me to use my radio equipment abroad, and it was a game changer for me. I think one of the most interesting parts of the world from an amateur radio point of view is the Caribbean. There are so many island nations in a relatively small area, particularly in the Windward and Leeward Islands. It's also possible to travel to several islands during the trip, as some of the Caribbean countries are only separated by a short flight or ferry crossing. I planned a 14-day ham radio DXpedition to locations in 4 countries in the northern part of the Leeward Islands, about 200 miles to the east of Puerto Rico. Firstly, St. Maarten, which is part Dutch with a ham radio prefix Papa Juliet 7, and part French with the prefix Fox Sierra. Next was the British Caribbean island of Anguilla, prefix Victor Papa 2 Echo, only a 15-mile trip by fast boat from St. Maarten. My time there included the 24-hour Islands on the Air contest. Then, to finish, I'd operate on St. Kitts, prefix Victor 4, for the last few days. This was purely a radio expedition, not a holiday. The only journeys taken on any of the islands were to and from the ports of entry, and visits to local stores for food, essential supplies, or to collect a radio license. The adventure began as I departed Glasgow Airport in Scotland on Wednesday, 17th July 2024, aboard the British Airways Airbus 320 for the short flight down to London's Heathrow Airport. Then a quick 40-mile zip around London on the M25 and south to London's Gatwick Airport for an overnight stop. The following morning, I boarded a British Airways Boeing 777, call sign Speedbird 17 Papa Bravo, for an 8.5-hour flight. We took off and soon picked up a heading of 225 degrees, or southwest. I was using air miles for the BA flights, so I also managed to bag an upgrade to Club. The flight from London Gatwick landed at VC Bird Airport in Antigua. But there were still 2 more flights to take that day, before I'd arrive at my final destination. After a 3-hour layover in Antigua, I was off again. The next flight was in a Winair ATR 42. My aircraft hold weight restriction for inter-Caribbean flights was 50 pounds, or 22.6 kilograms. I had to travel light. It took some careful juggling, but I ended up exactly on the maximum weight allowed. I could have booked more hold luggage, but this was a solo trip and I wanted a small but effective setup. I would be travelling in a hot and humid climate, and I could well do without the burden of any extra luggage. This was another of the challenges I set myself. What was the minimum amount of equipment I would need for an effective flyaway radio station? My flight from Antigua to St Maarten flew via Tortola in the British Virgin Islands. Following a 30-minute turnaround there, the final leg eventually brought me into the Dutch side of the Caribbean island of St Maarten, 32 hours after I left Scotland. The distance travelled on the outbound journey was over 4,700 miles. Some months earlier, I had applied to the Bureau of Telecommunications in St Maarten for a visitor's amateur radio licence. My first job on the morning after I arrived was to go to their office, pay the fee and collect my PJ7 licence document. The licence and getting approval for my radio equipment cost around $175 US. This was by some margin the most expensive of the trip. I booked all of the accommodation through Airbnb. I obtained permission from the owners of all the properties where I'd be staying to put up an antenna. I had studied carefully the online photographs of the accommodation, so I had an idea where my antenna might be set up. The locations chosen were always on very high ground. In the case of St Maarten, it was up an extremely steep hill, just a little short of the summit. It was one of the highest properties available to rent on the Dutch side of St Maarten. The elevated position offered excellent views to the west, north and east, and I reckoned this would be an ideal location for an amateur radio station. The equipment I selected for the trip had to be small, lightweight and very reliable. My transceiver was the Yaesu FT891, hooked up to a MAT30 tuner. I used a Sotabeam's compact, lightweight 10-metre telescopic travel mast and fixed the feed point of my G5RV dipole about 8 metres over the ground. I used the Bear Dynamic DT109 headset that has an excellent quality microphone. During the trip, a huge number of hams I contacted commented on the high quality of my audio. I'd preset the radio with Bob Heil's parametric EQ settings and transmit bandwidth. I also had a remote control from my pre-recorded CQ voice calls, and I took along an old but very reliable Mac laptop for logging. I'd be using Rumlog NG to keep a record of all the QSOs made. The only spares I took were fuses. I expected to have many amateurs answering my CQ calls, as St Maarten doesn't have that many resident hams, and it could be thought of as quite a rare DX contact for many. Well, was I in for a shock. For the 5 days I spent operating on St Maarten, I was almost constantly handling big pileups, something I'd never experienced before. At several points, I needed to resort to calling by numbers, asking only for stations with a number 1 in the call sign to respond, then number 2, and so on. I was very frequently spotted on many of the DX clusters too.
Juliet, Yankee number 4, Charlie Hotel, Japan Yankee 4, Charlie Hotel. 9041 Alpha Radio, you are coming to Croatia 57 to 58, 57 to 58, QSL. Ocean Radio 4, United. In the clear, you're 5 and 7, 57. Florida 8, Echo X-Ray Mexico, 5 and 9. Roger, many thanks Eric, you're 5 by 7 here west of France. Very nice audio by the way.
5-9 plus here into the city of Toronto, Canada. Booming signal there. I noticed that you're running a stroke station, and you're originally, I think, from Scotland.
QRP station then?
Yeah, QRP, Mike 6, Oscar, X-ray, Oscar. M6 Oxo, Brian in Liverpool, over.
I'm very happy to get you. And you're 57 in Luxembourg.
The 73s, enjoy the pilot. My name is Carlos, calling from Monterrey, Mexico, 57, your signal Monterrey.
I'm
gonna confirm this on QRZ. This is very cool. Great, man. You got a pileup going on. 73, KG4 KGL.
Well, thank you, Eric. Here at 59 into Southeast Texas. I appreciate the call. This is Alpha Bravo 5 Kilo Mike 73.
As I was activating quite a rare island, many hams were delighted to log a contact with St. Maarten. But also there were some excellent DX stations answering my CQ calls. Many QSOs were completed with Australia, Indonesia, India, and plenty of others too. I was getting excellent reception reports from my 100-watt transmissions from the 891. Part of the DXpedition plan was to operate not only on the Dutch side, but also the French side of St. Maarten as Fox Sierra / GM5RDX. This is allowed under the CEPT reciprocal licensing arrangements, without the need to apply for any additional license. It would have to be a portable setup from the car. I took the equipment and drove over to the French side, but with very windy conditions, the heat, humidity, and difficulty in being able to support my antenna, I decided that I was content to go back to my PJ7 QTH and resume the busy operations there. By the end of my time in St. Maarten, I had logged well over 1,200 QSOs, with hams in 75 countries and 46 of the states in the USA. Around 60% of all the QSOs made from St. Maarten were with amateurs in the USA and Canada. I've got to say that the operating standard of all these North American stations was outstanding. My most interesting DX was with Philippe, FK4QX in New Caledonia.
Quebec X-ray station, I hear Quebec X-ray in there, make your call. Okay, Florida Kilo 4, Florida Kilo 4, Quebec X-ray, is that QSL? Yeah, QSL, you are 5 by 9, over? Roger, very happy with the Florida Kilo, thank you very much. You're about a 3 by 3, a 3 by 3 in St. Maarten, thank you for the call. Okay, thank you, 3 by 3, good luck, thank you. Thank you very much, appreciate that one.
The longest DX from St. Maarten was just under 11,500 miles with John, VK6JX, on a bearing of 0 degrees directly over the North Pole to Perth in Western Australia. It was also great to have a QSO over the mountain to the French side of St. Maarten with Marco, FS4WBS. It was time to move on. I travelled by one of the fast charter boats 15 miles across to the British Caribbean island of Anguilla. 17 miles long and 3 miles wide, this island is low-lying with the highest ground less than 250 feet or 75 metres above sea level. The location I selected here was on some of the highest ground in Anguilla, in a very isolated location at the end of a long track, but very close to the northern shore of the island, with excellent 360-degree takeoff for my transmissions. I applied for my licence and paid for it from Scotland. It was a temporary local licence. Victor Papa 2 Echo is the prefix for Anguilla, and I was very happy to be offered Golf Mike as a suffix. The Scottish ham radio prefix is GM. So Victor Papa 2 Echo Golf Mike was going to be my call for the next 5 days, including the IOTA contest. The license here costs around 50 Eastern Caribbean dollars, which is around 20 US dollars, and it covered the duration of my visit. Once more, I had surveyed the area by scrutinising photographs on the websites of the property and also on Google Maps. I set up the mast with my 51-foot G5RV dipole again, and enjoyed the benefits of a covered outside space, which, because it was on high ground, offered a cool breeze too. I had a problem with a high noise floor. Considering my isolated location and the lack of any solar equipment, I expected that the mains electricity supply was inherently noisy. I had noticed a car accessory store not too far from the house, so I went back to it and bought a 12-volt car battery. Once my equipment was powered by this source, I had S0 noise level. and I'd be able to charge the battery using my 110 volt amateur radio power supply unit.
Whiskey Alpha 2, Victor, United Yankee.
Mike 7, Whiskey, Echo. Lima, Zulu, and Kilo uniform. In the last hour, you coming to S9. I think the conditions are just changing for your advantage, buddy. Lovely signal. Running here with a kilowatt into 4 element Yagi. Beautiful signal from your side. Victor Papa 2 Echo, Germany, Mexico. Lima Zulu 1 Kilo United.
Kilo Oscar 4, Papa Sierra, from Victor Papa 2 Echo Golf Mike.
Well, Eric, it's making a good trip up here. You're 5 and 5, 5 and 7 up here. It's kind of fluctuating a little bit, but that little rig's making a good trip there. It sounds real good. I got a good clear audio signal on it.
I'm a member of the Paisley Amateur Radio Club. While in Anguilla, I did a live stream to one of the weekly club meetings, something that we all really enjoyed.
Eric, you said here, you're saying lonely. You've only spoken to about 2,000 folk across the line.
But you know, the final day in St. Maarten, it started off really busy, which I did not expect. I jumped on to make a few scene calls, and 7 hours later, I'd spoken to nearly 500 people. And I kind of didn't quite know how to handle that. The final night, there wasn't that many calling, so it was actually really nice to sit and talk to people, which is kind of what it's all about.
I also had HF contacts with 6 or 7 of my club members during the trip.
It's great to work the guys, and lovely to get the Scottish Park Station guys into the logbook and give you a nice little flag for QRZ. But yeah, Mike, you know, that's Japan, Quebec, from PJ7, GM5RDX. Back to you.
QSL, Sierra Papa 3, Tango Lima Juliet, 5 by 555 into Anguilla.
There were more pile-ups and plenty of hams very happy to make contact with this island as well. I spoke to Rob, M0KPD Mobile, on several occasions. He had an ICOM 7300 and a 600 watt amp in his van. He'd be heading to work early in the morning, driving between Gatwick and Brighton in England, and I'd be just about to close down the station very late at night. He's a member of the Mid-Sussex Amateur Radio Society, a club that once had Louis Varney as their president. Louis was the original designer of the G5RV dipole. Rob thought that Louis would be really happy to hear that his G5RV antenna design was my antenna of choice for the DXpedition, and that it was delivering outstanding performance from my Caribbean island locations. Another nice story from Anguilla is that John, K4 Oscar X-Ray, called in a second time to tell me that my confirmation of our first QSO had given him the final country he needed for his QRZ.com Master of North America Award, something he was very happy about.
All set. Finally, IOTA contest weekend again. One of my favourite weekends of the year. I'm on Anguilla and going to try and contact as many other islands as I can in this contest. Been working for a couple of days, getting some good DX. Time will tell what happens, but getting underway in about 25 minutes time.
The bands were not in good shape until later in the day for me. I started to make some progress from late afternoon onwards and pushed on throughout the night. It seemed to be much harder to make progress compared to the previous years. Many of the stations calling me were not actually in the contest, but in the end I managed a similar score to last year. There were many hams that were delighted to have a contact with such a rare DX island that Anguilla is, including myself, as local ham Keith Victor Papa 2 Echo Kilo Golf answered my CQ call. We chatted for a while and then arranged to meet up on the Sunday afternoon at my QTH in Anguilla, and ended up chatting for hours. Not only were we both radio hams, but we also spent all of our working lives in broadcasting. He suggested to me that I could join a couple of the Caribbean HF nets on Sunday, which I did, and I connected with very many friendly amateurs on other Caribbean islands. The total number of QSOs from Anguilla for the 5 days was just under 1100, in 92 countries. There were over 6,000 hits on the VP2EGM QRZ.com page during the same period. The longest DX was just under 12,000 miles with Yankee Echo 9 Charlie Delta Lima in Indonesia on a bearing of 180 directly over the South Pole. The next day my station was all de-rigged, repacked, and then I headed off to Blowing Point to drop off the hire car and catch the fast boat back to St Maarten. It's very straightforward to cross between these two islands, and the charter boat dock in St Maarten is right beside the airport. I had a few hours to relax before catching another ATR 42 flight with Winair, this time to St Kitts. Once I landed, the bags were swiftly collected and it was just a short ride to my next QTH. The location was high up on the edge of a sea cliff at Potato Bay on the southwest coast of St Kitts. This had a clear 180-degree takeoff from west through south to east, with a great view down to the island of Nevis in the distance. Again, I had applied for my licence from the UK. It was very straightforward and it cost the equivalent of $30 US. All of the accommodation for the trip was very carefully selected, based purely on the suitability for amateur radio operations. There was a pretty solid structure to attach the mast to, and in no time I was up and running again. Once again, there were high levels of noise on receive. James, one of the owners of the property, offered me a 50 amp hour 12 volt battery from a car he wasn't using. This very kind gesture solved the issue, and I was back at S0 noise levels again. The location had uninterrupted views to the south, but had high ground to the north behind me. It definitely favoured transmissions to Central and South America, Australia and New Zealand too. I had my first ever contact with Paraguay from here, when ZP1HTW answered my CQ call, and a nice QSO with Herbert followed. I only had 2 days operating here before Tropical Storm Debbie, later to become Hurricane Debbie, brought transmissions to a premature end. Frequent lightning strikes close to the island and very strong winds suggested to me it was time to pack the gear away for the final time. In summary, it was a great trip and I had a lot of fun. The radio equipment performed perfectly throughout the fortnight. The QRZ.com pages that I had prepared for all 3 call signs had around 12,000 hits. A total of just under 2,500 QSOs were made into just over 100 countries between the 3 call signs used. I got some great DX and succeeded in contacting many Caribbean, Central and South American countries I had not had a QSO with before. I managed this with an incredibly simple station setup. Many hams were delighted to log the countries I was operating in for the first time, and remarkably, 6 amateurs managed to have QSOs with me on all 3 islands, including Rob in his van. So it's all finished, and my logs have been uploaded to QRZ Logbook, Logbook of the World, EQSL and Club Log. I'm already starting to think about where I'll take my radio equipment for my next trip. A Caribbean island is going to be very hard to beat, but you never know.